So this is chapter 1 in media and culture for mass communication class, and this is the fourth section, and it's a shorter one, but it's really important to remember. So the fact that when we're talking about media, we're really talking about stories and narratives, and the stories that we tell are changing now. When we talk about stories, oftentimes we think about, the narrative of a book, things that have a beginning, a middle, and the end. We think about heroes and those kind of big archetypes. But there's been a shift in the stories, especially in the digital era. And you can see beginnings of these shifts in the 20th century, but we really have kind of, again, accelerated that shift as we've gotten into the 21st century. So the shift of the stories that we're telling to talk about everyday people. And we, when I say we think about narratives and books and heroes and, kind of fairy tales and once upon a time, when we started to get a change in the 1960s to kind of want to talk about other points of views, when we want to talk about the fact that, telling the story of the struggles of everyday life is just as heroic as telling the story of Superman, saving the world. That mirrors a shift in society. And again, as we get into the 20th century, we want to see more diversity. We want to see everyone actually represented in our media, in our TV shows, and in our movies. It's not enough for Scarlett Johansson to play more diverse characters. No, in fact, we would like someone who is Asian to play the lead role in a anime that was, absolutely fundamental for those. I grew up in the 90s. I was born in the 80s, but the 90s were really formative for me. So Ghost in the Shell was an amazing, important piece of movie making to me, and to many people in my generation. And the idea that Scarlett Johansson would play the lead character is kind of insulting. And so again, we see things like Get Out, where we want to make sure that our movies actually reflect issues in our time. And again, this kind of, when we see reality TV, and again, there's always going to be naysayers and people who, talk about, everything is changing, and, this is, woe is me, it's the end of culture. The fact that we want to hear about everyday people and elevate them to the level of celebrity tells us a lot about what's important to us as cultures. We can participate in that. And again, when we talk about having a TV show being canceled and then people coming out of the woodwork on Twitter and inundating the studio so that they end up making another season or they end up making a movie, we realize that we have power, that those gatekeepers are arbitrary, and that we can determine what is important to us and that the stories that are told. So narrative, stories. So narrative is the storytelling business that media institution and outlets are in. We're crafting a narrative out of, things like Facebook ads. They tell stories. When you watch the newest ad for an iPhone, they're telling you stories. They're showing how you can be a storyteller. So the fact that everything within media is grounded in stories, it has its advantages and disadvantages, just like anything. So we need to be aware of the fact that, when we try to create a narrative out of everything, we can kind of fall into pitfalls of cliches. We can try to impose a narrative on things that, have their own spontaneous way of evolving. A thing I always think about is when I'm watching a sports game. So, I'm tuning into the Champions League final. And this year it's really weird because, the kind of the playoff stages of it were held in a bubble. And there are these storylines about whether or not, this team will be able to kind of, rise above. We've got, they had a German team that has been dominant for absolute ages in Germany. And you've got the French team. And they're relatively newcomers, and they're very much seen as trying to buy their way to the top. So, it's the storyline of, will, the team with history be able to overcome the team splashing out all the money, which kind of doesn't account for the fact that the team from Germany splashes out a ton of money themselves. So we try to simplify things in order to fit these storylines, when in fact life is far more complicated, far more messy than that. And at times that simplification can be really dangerous. And again, everything in our daily lives, ends up being affected by that. When you think about how, you happen to go to a certain website and it uses cookies, and then you're getting inundated with those things on your Facebook feed. All of this is trying to craft narratives around things. When we try to sell things, we often try to craft a narrative. So if you take public relations later on, we're going to talk about buyer personas. And so if you're trying to sell notebooks, you might end up crafting this narrative around outdoorsy people who go hiking and they like to have adventures, and then you're going to record your adventures in your notebook. And so you make this whole narrative about people who are out in the Rocky Mountains. And what do the Rocky Mountains have to do with notebooks? Well, not much of anything, except for the fact that it'll help you sell it. And you're going to create images around that kind of outdoorsy, very rugged, down-to-earth kind of look. And you're going to create all these stories with the intention of selling things. So we need to be aware of why the stories are being created, and we also need to be aware, sorry for that notification noise, but we also need to be aware of when we're trying to impose narrative onto things that maybe aren't as simple. So while this is 2 slides, I thought they're really important points, and they're important things that we need to think about and to kind of keep in mind whenever we're approaching kind of critiquing media.